Hi, I'm Topher. I said from the very beginning that the COVID fines were very unlikely to hold up in court, provided someone was willing to take them far enough, to appeal up to a high enough court, the Supreme Court, maybe even the High Court of Australia. Once we get there, that's where the real court cases begin, and I find it very unlikely that they're going to find in favour of the New South Wales government, the Victorian government, the West Australian government, etc., who have made these draconian rules and applied these insane fines if you break them. I was mocked, of course, for suggesting that the government might have its legislation wrong, that the courts might actually find that the governments were the ones breaking the law. And, of course, every time a magistrate's court, a low-level court, found in favour of the government, people came out of the woodwork to remind me that I must have lied. I must have been deceiving people when I said that I believed that these laws were illegal and would be found as such if cases were pushed to high enough courts. Well, of course, they don't understand how the legal system works. A magistrate is never going to turn around and tell the government that they got their entire legal structures wrong. They're going to find technicalities, maybe, or they're just going to go along with what the government said. So what it takes is time. It takes time for people to lose in the magistrate's court, appeal to the Supreme Court or to the county court, and move their way up that legal tree to get to the point where they're fighting in a court that actually might make the right decision. And one such decision just came down yesterday in New South Wales, where the New South Wales Supreme Court found that 33,000 of the fines issued by New South Wales Police against New South Wales people for breaching the public health orders in New South Wales were actually illegal. They've been immediately reversed, and in fact, anyone that's paid those fines is going to get a refund. There's also a bunch more fines, thousands more fines, whose legal standing is now in question. We're going to find out next year whether they will also be thrown out, but I suspect that they're going to follow the 33,000 that have already been thrown out. People are understandably very excited about this decision, but I would urge some caution. The actual reason for the decision from the New South Wales Supreme Court is on you guessed it, technicality, not on anything of real substance. It's not a precedent that can necessarily be used in other court cases or a precedent that can necessarily help us here in Victoria. Of course, they're entirely separate legal systems, so that would always be an unlikely outcome anyway. But the reason why the New South Wales Supreme Court has found that these 33,000 fines must be either withdrawn or refunded is because they were too vague. And so people are already coming out of the woodwork, predictably, and saying, well, it was only a technicality. The court didn't find that there was anything actually wrong with the substance of the public health orders, of the fines and the lockdowns and the crackdowns on people who disobeyed. They just found that they should have done a slightly better job of writing the legislation and drafting the fines. And that, as far as the court case is written, is true. However, there's another layer to this. No court, even the Supreme Court, really wants to start a pitched battle with its own government. After all, being a judge and being promoted as a judge is something of a popularity contest within your own profession. You have to be in good standing, and that means you want to draw attention to yourself. You definitely want to make a few courageous and controversial decisions along the way, but putting a whole bunch of people offside in a profession that proudly loves government, loves laws, loves technicalities as well, going in there and saying, actually, the whole foundation of our legal system is wrong. Our government is in flagrant breach of human rights legislation, and it's our responsibility as judges to pull them back into line. For judges to actually do their job is a level of courage that most of them lack. So when they find themselves presented with a case that they want to find against the government, they think, you know what the government did here was actually wrong as a matter of principle. They're not usually going to find on the basis of principle. They'll find a technicality. They'll find some other excuse to make the right decision for the wrong reasons so as to not rock the boat too much. This is a trend we've seen in legal court cases and legal decisions for decades here in this country. I'll give you an example from Victoria, my own situation. Victoria Police have now withdrawn incitement charges against, well, as far as I know, against everybody else. I don't know that for a fact, but I'm not aware of anyone else besides myself where Victoria Police and the public prosecutors are maintaining their efforts to find these people guilty of incitement. We know that Monica Smith, of course, famously arrested, charged with incitement. She refused the insane bail conditions, and she spent 21 days in prison, much of that in solitary confinement. She had incitement charges withdrawn. We know that other people have had incitement charges withdrawn as well, and like I said, to my knowledge, I'm the only one left with incitement charges against my name. My lawyer actually reached out after the Monica Smith charges were withdrawn. My lawyer reached out to Victoria Police and said, well, if you've withdrawn hers, why don't you withdraw Topher's as well? What they came back with was interesting. They said, no, we won't. And if you have a look at the withdrawal of Monica's charges and other people's charges, there's always that technical reason why. They're not saying, hey, these charges are actually wrong in substance and should never have been brought, and this was an abuse of the legal system and an abuse of the reason why incitement charges as a concept were even developed in the first place. No. That would be too substantial. That would be too consequential. That would have too much of an impact on that police officer or that prosecutor's career. They couldn't possibly do that. They have to find technicalities. In Monica's case, it was because she'd already spent so much time in prison that whatever the punishment for her incitement, supposed, was going to be, would already be time served and then much more. So there was no point proceeding with the prosecution. Now, that's correct. That technicality is a correct technicality. But it's also of no use to anybody else, and that's the point. In another case that I'm aware of, the charges were withdrawn because the person charged with incitement was quite elderly, and therefore they felt that it was unfair to be prosecuting them and pursuing them in that way at their age, and they were a very low risk of repeat offending. Again, true. Again, it's correct to withdraw the charges against someone in his situation, but it's also inconsequential, insubstantial, technical. It doesn't help someone, for example, like me. And that's kind of the game, kind of the point. These people are trying to make the right decisions, but with one eye on their career and their popularity within their own profession, they're making them often for the wrong reasons, so that they're not setting any precedents and therefore ruffling any feathers further up in their own career. In my case, what we actually did, we went to the Victoria Police and said, hey, how about you withdraw Topher's charges as well? And they said, no, we won't. We won't withdraw Topher's charges, which I found interesting. Now, I have the same lawyer that Monica had when her charges were withdrawn. She'd recently switched across to my lawyer when that happened. So we're very aware of what happened in Monica's case. And my lawyer, the same lawyer, then went to them and requested the same thing in my case, and they said no. Now, of course, there's no technicality to let me off on. I haven't done any jail time. I'm not old. The technicalities that they've found to let other people off don't apply in my case. And so there's a really interesting question there. So what we did was say, okay, if you're not going to withdraw the charges against Topher, then we want to proceed to trial. We want to move on from this repeated mention hearing adjournment cycle that we've been in at our request, I must say. I've been very, very happy to allow some time to pass because I believe that time is on my side. But when the Victoria Police said, we're not going to withdraw your charges, I turned around and said, okay, then let's proceed to a court case. I want to have my day in court. I think enough time has passed, enough evidence has come out, enough public sentiment has shifted, and I want my day in court. They turned around, the prosecution, and said, actually, you know what, let's just keep it at a mention hearing for now. Now, that all happened about a month and a half ago, and it was adjourned once again, and the next hearing date is in January of 2023, getting on towards 15 months after my arrest. And that raises a lot of really interesting questions, for my case in particular, and for what's happening at a technical level and behind the scenes as these people are thinking about their careers on the one hand, whilst also some of them, a percentage of them, are also still trying to do the right thing. Why would they insist on keeping the charges against me and yet want to defer them and not want to go to trial? Are they not confident of winning? Well, I've no idea what's going through their heads. But what's interesting is that last deferment from a few months ago until January of next year, of course, meant that they were pushing it out beyond the outcome of the Victorian election that just happened a weekend ago. They potentially, my theory is, my suspicion is, that they wanted to see the results of the Victorian election before deciding whether they were going to continue with their prosecution of me or not. Now, that's a fairly serious theory that I've got there. The idea that the legal system and prosecutors within the legal system would have one finger up trying to read the political climate and have concern for who's sitting in Spring Street and allow that concern to affect their decisions around who they charge and who they don't. That's a pretty serious thing for me to be suggesting that I suspect they are guilty of. I suspect that that's what's going on. But let me justify my suspicion a little bit. Because we know that even bringing the incitement charges in the first place was political. It wasn't actually based on good legal processes and good legal understanding. We know that because Marty Fokker, one of the people that was helping and supporting the protests, caught police officers on camera admitting that they were going to trump up charges against protesters so that they could slap bail conditions on them, knowing that the charges were going to get thrown out when they got to court anyway. We got that on camera. If you haven't seen that footage, you need to watch Battleground Melbourne. Go to battlegroundmelbourne.com. You can watch the entire documentary for free there, and you'll see that piece of footage and much, much more. The charges, especially the incitement charges, were political to begin with. That was the entire purpose of them. They weren't there out of legal necessity. They were there for political outcomes and political purposes to try and silence political dissent. In that context, is it so ridiculous, my theory, that maybe they're keeping the charges against me but wanting to stall them, wanting to wait until next year because they've got one finger to the wind, reading the politics, trying to see what's going to happen in the election before they decide what they're going to do with my charges? I can't prove that that's the case. I don't know that to be the case. But it certainly has that appearance to me as I consider why they've dropped all the charges against everybody else that I know of for incitement, and yet they're maintaining the charges against me. What I might need is a technicality. But I'm not going to go looking for one, because I want to fight my court case on substance. I want to fight my court case because it was wrong for them to do what they did. The next court date is in January. We'll find out what happens from there, whether it just moves to another mention, whether we can actually move towards a directions hearing and start to get this court case on the road. 2023 is going to be a very interesting year for me. But back to this New South Wales case. Someone finally got the case up to a high enough court where they could get a broad enough decision, a sweeping decision that has really significant consequences for the 33,000 people whose fines have been withdrawn and or will be refunded. That's a pretty significant decision. But it took someone with the courage and the resources to actually take it that far. In Victoria, I might have to be the person that takes it that far. We'll see. That will depend whether I do that. Whether I have to do that will depend on the outcome of my own court case in the Magistrates Court and whether that gets appealed by the police or whether we decide that we need to appeal that, etc. There's a lot to play out yet before we know what happens. But I'm convinced that what I said right back at the beginning, that these laws and the fines that have stemmed from these laws were illegal to begin with and would be found to be illegal if someone had the resources and the courage and the right court case and were willing to take it to a high enough court where the matters of substance could really be tested. That's not to say that the decision would be based on substance, because if you win on substance so often, as I said earlier, the courts will find in your favour, they'll give you the right decision, but for the wrong reasons. They'll find a technicality. But in any case, we have to keep the pressure on, because court decisions, even when they go in our favour but are based on technicalities, aren't good enough. We need court decisions that are based on substance, court decisions that recognise that governments broke human rights law, that they took our rights from us. Decisions that set precedents that will tie the hands of government and stop them from doing those things again. We don't want technicalities. We want justice. And I, for one, am willing to keep going until we get it. And I hope that you'll join me. I'm Topher Field. Please go to topherfield.net and join my email list in case I get cancelled. And don't forget to follow me on social media, at least for as long as I'm still there, on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube, and many, many more. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.